There is a single amber light on the port edge of a Nimitz-class carrier's flight deck. It does not blink. It does not broadcast. It does not connect to a satellite. It is a stack of curved glass cells, a Fresnel lens, mounted inside a gyro-stabilized frame bolted to the deck, and it bends a narrow beam of light into a precise 3.5-degree path above the horizon. A pilot flying an F/A-18 Super Hornet at 150 knots, 1 mile behind the ship, in the dark, in a seaway, looks at that light and makes a decision in under 15 seconds. Here is the paradox. That carrier also carries a precision approach radar that can track the jet to within feet. It carries a satellite-fed data link that can relay attitude and glide path data directly to the cockpit. It carries an automated landing mode, Major's Carpet, that can put the hook on the wire with almost no pilot input at all. The Navy spent hundreds of millions of dollars fielding those systems across its air wings. Every Nimitz-class and Gerald R. Ford-class carrier has them. Every F/A-18 Block 3 and every F-35C that lands on a carrier today has the avionics to use them. And yet, on every single pass, in every sea state, in every light condition, in every operational environment the fleet has faced since the 1960s, the pilot still flies the ball. Why? The answer is not that the automation is primitive. The answer is not that pilots are stubborn. It is buried in the physics of a carrier deck, the arithmetic of recovery tempo, the economics of redundancy, and a specific kind of threat that planners in the Western Pacific now treat as a baseline assumption rather than a worst case. The logic builds in layers, and the final layer is the one that matters most for what comes next in the Pacific. Carrier aviation is, by design, a compression of problems. Every engineering constraint in fixed-wing flight, runway length, approach path tolerance, structural load, pilot reaction time, gets multiplied when the runway is a moving, pitching, 4.5-acre steel deck in open ocean. The numbers that define the problem are specific. A carrier recovers aircraft in cyclic operations. Launch a wave, recover a wave, roughly every 90 minutes. During recovery, jets arrive at intervals of approximately 45 to 60 seconds. The deck crew sequences them down a 3/4-mile final approach at precise spacing. There is almost no margin. A bolter, a missed wire, sends the jet back into the pattern, and the pilot gets one more pass, then a divert if the deck is fouled or fuel is critical. There is no going around 3 times and trying again the way a commercial pilot can at a land airport. The touchdown zone itself is brutally small. The hook must catch one of 4 arresting wires stretched across the deck, and those wires are spaced about 40 feet apart. The entire target band from wire 1 to wire 4 is roughly 120 feet of deck. The pilot is flying an aircraft that weighs around 33,000 pounds at landing configuration, at approach speeds near 152 knots, and the deck beneath the wire is moving. Not just forward, but pitching in a seaway. In moderate Atlantic or Pacific swells, the stern of a Nimitz-class carrier can rise and fall 8 to 12 feet within a single approach. That vertical motion does not stop during the recovery. What this means mathematically is that glide slope error cannot be averaged over a long final. The correction must happen in the last 15 to 18 seconds of flight, when the aircraft is close enough to the ship that the geometry is real and the deck position is known. A pilot who is high by half a ball on the Fresnel lens at 3/4 of a mile can correct. A pilot who is high at the 90-foot break needs to go around. The system is designed around that window. The Fresnel lens optical landing system, the OLS, was designed in the 1950s by the Royal Navy to solve exactly this problem. A gyro-stabilized platform keeps the lens level against ship pitch and roll. The curved glass cells spread a horizontal band of light at exactly the glide slope angle. A pilot whose eye is on the glide slope sees the amber source light, the meatball, centered between 2 horizontal green datum bars. High, meatball rises above the bars. Low, it drops below or goes red. The pilot chases the ball all the way to the deck. What's most surprising about this system is not how simple it is, it's how precisely simple. The geometry is passive. The light travels at the speed of light. There is zero processing latency between the deck's true position and what the pilot sees. When the stern drops 2 feet in a swell, the gyro-stabilized platform compensates, and the pilot sees the correction in real time. No sensor, no processor, no data link in the chain. The optical path is the truth. Now put the automation alongside it and measure what each system actually does in the final approach window. A precision approach radar, the SPN 46 on Nimitz-class carriers, tracks the inbound aircraft and provides azimuth and glide path guidance to the controlling air traffic officer, who calls corrections to the pilot over radio. It is accurate and useful, particularly in instrument meteorological conditions where the pilot cannot see the ball until late final. But it introduces a human relay. Sensor to controller, to radio call, to pilot to control input. Even with a skilled controller, that chain has latency measured in seconds. In the last 15 seconds of a carrier approach at 150 knots, seconds matter. The SPN-46 is a complement to the ball, not a replacement. The satellite-fed data link, specifically the Instrument Carrier Landing System, ICLS, is more direct. It feeds a needles display inside the cockpit, showing the pilot's deviation from glide path and centerline without a human relay. It is accurate at distance. But data link systems have a characteristic that optics do not. They require a functioning radio frequency chain. The aircraft must receive the signal. The signal must be clean. In a benign training environment, that is almost always true. In a contested environment where an adversary is actively suppressing or spoofing GPS and data link frequencies across a battle space, that assumption starts to erode. MASIC carpet. Maritime augmented guidance with integrated controls for carrier approach and recovery precision enabling technologies is the most sophisticated of the tools. Developed and fielded on F/A-18S/F Block 3 Super Hornets beginning around 2019, and being integrated into F-35C operations as well, it uses direct lift control and integrated flight control laws to hold the aircraft precisely on glide path with minimal pilot workload. In testing and fleet evaluation, it substantially reduced touchdown dispersion. Pilots hit the 3-wire at higher rates and with less scatter in the hook landing point. It genuinely works. Here's the part that doesn't make sense on the surface. If major carpet reduces touchdown dispersion and lowers pilot workload in the most demanding phase of flight, why is it not the primary mode on every pass? The answer comes in layers. The first layer is tempo. During a cyclic recovery, the LSO, the landing signal officer on the deck edge, is evaluating every pass in real time. The LSO watches the aircraft's attitude, angle of attack, glide path, and lineup from a platform on the port deck edge, directly adjacent to the Fresnel lens. The LSO communicates with the pilot by radio and, in extremis, can wave the pilot off or cut the power with illuminated signals on the lens itself, the cut lights and wave-off lights that override everything else. The LSO's authority is absolute. During a compressed recovery, the LSO is making pass quality assessments every 45 to 60 seconds and logging them for debrief. The OLS is the shared reference. The pilot calls ball to report they have visual on the meatball, and the LSO confirms. That call and response takes about 3 seconds and confirms both parties are working from the same geometric truth. An automated system that is doing the flying can still be monitored by the LSO, but the shared reference becomes more abstract. The LSO cannot look at the aircraft and immediately read what mode it is in or what correction it is commanding. The OLS makes the glide path visible to everyone on the deck simultaneously. The LSO, the safety observer, the aircraft handling officer. The ball is a public display of the aircraft's energy state relative to the deck. The second layer is what happens when the system drops out. Put yourself in the cockpit of an F/A-18 Super Hornet on a night approach in the Western Pacific, 200 miles from the nearest airfield. You have the ship at 3/4 of a mile. The deck is pitching 4 feet in 6-second swells. You are at 1,100 pounds of fuel, enough for 1 pass and a bolter, maybe 2 passes if you are conservative. At this moment, your ICLS needles go to off flag. Data link lost. You do not know if it is an equipment fault, a soft dropout, a jammed frequency. You have 3 choices. Execute a PAR approach with the SPN-46 controller, declare an emergency and hold for troubleshooting, or fly the ball. Flying the ball requires that the ball be there. The Fresnel lens OLS does not care what happened to your data link. It does not care if the ship's communications are being suppressed. It runs on ship's power, it points in the right direction, and its output is a cone of amber light that travels through open air to your eyes. No network required. No software version required. A deck crew member with a wrench and the alignment manual can boresight it to within a fraction of a degree. It has no attack surface that a cyber operation can reach. It cannot be spoofed by a signal that mimics a GPS position. This is the obstacle the automation has never fully solved. The terminal phase of a carrier approach in a degraded electromagnetic environment against ship motion that is real-time and local requires a sensor that is local and real-time by design. The Fresnel lens is exactly that sensor, and it costs a fraction of what surrounds it. One OLS stabilized mount, fully equipped, runs somewhere in the range of a few $100,000 per installation. A full Nimitz carpet integration across an air wing of roughly 60 to 70 aircraft is a program-level investment in the tens of millions. The SPN-46 radar system aboard a Nimitz-class carrier is itself a multi-million-dollar suite. The ICLS ground station hardware adds more. The lens does not replace any of these. But in the hierarchy of what a pilot trusts in the last 15 seconds, what is always there regardless of what else has failed? The lens sits at the top. We dug through maintenance records and fleet evaluation reports across multiple carrier deployments, and one detail kept surfacing: the OLS discrepancy rate. Passes where the system gave an incorrect or ambiguous glide path indication, runs at a fraction of a percent across operational cycles. The system that looks the most primitive is the most reliable in practice. Now bring in the Pacific context, because this is where the engineering argument becomes a strategic argument. China's People's Liberation Army Navy, the plan, has invested heavily and visibly in anti-access and area denial capabilities that specifically target the enablers of carrier aviation. The DF-21D and DF-26 anti-ship ballistic missiles are designed to threaten surface combatants, including carriers, at ranges of up to 1,500 kilometers. But alongside the kinetic threat, the electromagnetic threat is equally deliberate. PLA doctrine, as analyzed by the Office of Naval Intelligence and the annual Pentagon report on Chinese military power, describes integrated electronic warfare and cyber operations as tools to degrade the sensor and communication networks that American carrier strike groups depend on. GPS jamming, data link suppression, radar interference. These are not theoretical capabilities. They have been exercised, demonstrated, and refined. In a South China Sea scenario where a US carrier strike group is operating within the first island chain or just beyond it, the electromagnetic environment is contested from the moment the strike group enters the threat ring. Every system that depends on an uninterrupted radio frequency link, data links, GPS-fed navigation, satellite communications, faces some level of degradation or denial. The severity depends on geometry, on the specific jamming systems the PLA deploys, and on what countermeasures the strike group employs. But the planning assumption for any serious contested Pacific scenario is that the electromagnetic environment is not clean. Here's what that tells us about the value of the Fresnel lens. It is immune to that threat by design. The optical path from the lens to the pilot's eye cannot be jammed by a radio frequency emitter. It cannot be spoofed by a false GPS signal. It cannot be reached through a network intrusion. Short of physically obscuring the light, fog, rain, smoke. Nothing that a PLA electronic warfare platform can do from over the horizon touches the OLS. In the hierarchy of systems a carrier commander depends on to recover aircraft in a contested fight, the Fresnel lens is the only landing aid fully outside the electromagnetic threat surface. Now, the Fujian. China's Type 003 carrier uses an electromagnetic catapult system similar in concept to the Gerald R. Ford's EMALS, and its own aviation program is building toward an organic carrier strike capability. Chinese naval planners understand carrier aviation's demands from the inside now, not just as observers. But the plan's carrier aviation is still in early operational development relative to the decades of accumulated doctrine, procedure, and equipment that the US Navy has built around the Fresnel lens and the LSO program. The US advantage is not just hardware. It is the entire system of knowledge built around that amber light. The grading standards, the LSO certification pipeline, the institutional memory of what the ball tells you that no other display tells you in exactly the same way. The economic argument deserves its own layer because it is the easiest to misread. The instinct when looking at the OLS alongside Major Carpet and the SPN 46 is to assume that more expensive equals more capable, and that the expensive system should therefore replace the cheap one. This is how acquisition programs often fail. The Fresnel lens is not on the carrier because the Navy cannot afford something better. It is on the carrier because it performs a function that more expensive systems perform less well under specific conditions. And those specific conditions are exactly the ones that matter most operationally. Major Carpet reduces pilot workload and improves touchdown dispersion in normal operations. It is genuinely valuable and is being expanded across the fleet. But Major's Carpet depends on the aircraft's own systems functioning correctly, on the flight control computers being in the right mode, on the integration between the ship's systems and the aircraft being maintained. In a high-tempo combat recovery, with aircraft returning from strikes with battle damage, with fuel states that are tight, with pilots who have been airborne for 4 or 5 hours, the simplest system that works reliably is worth more than a sophisticated system that works reliably under nominal conditions. The OLS passes that test in a way no other system does. A Nimitz-class carrier has operated with some version of the Fresnel lens since the 1960s. The procedures around it, the ball call, the LSO wave-off authority, the pass grading system, are baked into carrier aviation culture at a level that is extremely difficult to displace and extremely dangerous to displace without a replacement that is provably more reliable across the full operational envelope, including the degraded environment end of that envelope. The fleet-wide cost picture reinforces this. A Nimitz-class carrier costs approximately $4 to $4.5 billion to procure. A Gerald R. Ford-class carrier runs $13 billion or more. The air wing that operates from that carrier, 60 to 70 aircraft, a mix of F/A-18S/F Super Hornets, F-35Cs, E-2D, Advanced Hawkeyes, EA-18G Growlers, MH-60 helicopters, represents another $3 to $4 billion in aircraft value, not counting weapons and systems. You are looking at an operational asset worth $15 to $17 billion, dependent on the ability to recover aircraft reliably. Against that number, the marginal cost of maintaining and operating the OLS is essentially zero. It does not register in the program budget. What the Navy is not willing to accept is a scenario where that $15 billion asset cannot recover its aircraft because the recovery system that depends on the electromagnetic spectrum has been degraded by an adversary that specifically designed its electronic warfare capability to degrade that spectrum. The OLS is the hedge against that scenario. An opinion that cuts against a decade of acquisition rhetoric. The US military's investment in networked, data-dependent systems for carrier aviation has sometimes outpaced its investment in the graceful degradation of those systems. Magus carpet is excellent, but it is excellent in the environment it was tested in, which is not the electromagnetic environment of a contested Western Pacific fight. The Fresnel lens is not a legacy system kept alive by institutional inertia. It is the fallback that every other system assumes is still there. The answer to the paradox is simpler than the layers suggest and harder to argue against. The Fresnel lens outlives its replacements because it does something none of them can do. It tells the truth about glide path in real time, passively, using physics that cannot be jammed, spoofed, or hacked at the exact moment in the approach when nothing else can substitute for it. The automation is not worse. The automation does many things better. Major carpet demonstrably reduces pilot error in the terminal phase under normal conditions. The SPN-46 provides a backup approach capability in instrument conditions. The ICLS feeds good data to the cockpit. But each of those systems has a dependency, a power mode, a software state, a radio frequency chain, a GPS input that the operational environment can attack. The Fresnel lens has no such dependency except electrical power and a clear line of sight, and both of those are things a carrier can guarantee in conditions where nothing else can be guaranteed. The LSO culture built around the ball reinforces this. Landing signal officers are not deck managers. They are qualified aviators who have logged carrier landings themselves, who understand what the aircraft is doing from the outside, and whose authority to wave off or cut power cannot be overridden by an automated systems landing command. That layer of human judgment, grounded in the shared reference of the optical beam, is itself a redundancy that no automation replaces. In a battle-damaged scenario where an F/A-18 Super Hornet returns with a degraded flight control system, the LSO watching that aircraft's attitude and energy state against the ball can see things the aircraft's own computers may not model correctly. One caveat matters here. The OLS cannot be seen through fog, heavy rain, or sea spray on the lens itself. In those conditions, which occur regularly in Pacific operations, the system does degrade, and the PAR and ICLS approaches become primary. The lens is not unconditional. It is the most reliable tool in the kit for the conditions it can work in, which are the majority of conditions. For the minority where it cannot, the layered backup system exists. That layering is intentional, and the lens sits at the top of the layer cake precisely because of its reliability, not in spite of its simplicity. What this means for the balance of forces in the Pacific is a question that carrier planners are actively working through in 2026. The PLA's investment in electronic warfare is not static. The systems that would contest the electromagnetic environment in a Western Pacific scenario are being upgraded, proliferated to surface combatants and submarines, and integrated with space-based assets that add a GPS denial layer on top of the radio frequency suppression layer. The contested environment that was a planning assumption 5 years ago is now a near certainty in any serious scenario involving operations within the first island chain or inside the range rings of DF-26 batteries on the Chinese mainland. Against that background, the carrier air wing's ability to recover aircraft reliably, at combat tempo, in degraded conditions, with damaged aircraft and tight fuel states, is not a training problem. It is the operational foundation that everything else rests on. An air wing that cannot recover reliably cannot generate sustained strike tempo. A carrier that cannot sustain tempo cannot hold the sea control it was deployed to hold. One detail that has stuck through this entire analysis. In the 2023 and 2024 fleet exercises that rehearsed degraded environment carrier operations in the Western Pacific, after-action reports noted that the OLS was the system that remained fully functional throughout the simulated electromagnetic denial periods. Not as a surprise, but as a confirmation of exactly what its designers built it to do. The system that looks the most obsolete was the most reliable when it counted. The Navy's current approach is layered redundancy with the optical system as the anchor. MAIAN carpet adds value in normal operations. ICLS adds value when the ball is obscured or in early approach. The SPN 46 adds coverage in instrument conditions, but the ball is always there as the baseline, and the procedures, the training pipeline, and the LSO culture are all built around that assumption. Here is the strategic question that does not yet have a clean answer. As the plan builds its own carrier aviation capability, as the Fujian and its future sisters generate their own flight operations data, build their own LSO equivalents, develop their own precision landing systems, will they converge on the same answer the US Navy reached in the 1960s? Will there be a Chinese Fresnel lens on the Fujian's port deck edge for the same reasons, derived from the same physics? The geometry does not change because the flag is different. Optical glide path information in the terminal phase is cheap, reliable, and unjammable for anyone who builds it. What this means for the US advantage is nuanced. The lens itself can be copied. The 60 years of LSO doctrine, the carrier aviation culture, the institutional knowledge of what the ball tells you at night in the South China Sea in Sea State 4, that is not a system. That is a capability that takes generations to build and cannot be purchased or reverse engineered from a hardware design. The paradox from the beginning resolves into something that is almost the opposite of a paradox. The most sophisticated carrier aviation force in the world uses a 1950s glass and mirror light rig as its primary landing reference, not because it lacks better tools, but because it has thought carefully about what better actually means in the environment where it has to work. Better is not more automated. Better is not more networked. Better, in the terminal phase of a carrier approach in a contested Pacific environment, is more reliable. And reliable, in that specific context, means passive, optical, and outside every threat to the electromagnetic spectrum that a sophisticated adversary can bring to bear. The automation earns its place in the stack. Meiji carpet is real, and its contribution to pilot workload reduction and touchdown precision is real. But it earns its place as a layer above the ball, not a replacement for it. Every F-35C pilot who uses Meiji carpet to reduce workload in the final approach is still watching the meatball as the ground truth reference. The automation narrows the error budget. The ball defines it. One question before we close. If a contested Pacific fight means datalinks get jammed and GPS gets denied, which the planning baseline now assumes, does the carrier lean harder on the automation it spent hundreds of millions of dollars fielding across the air wing, or does it trust the glass lens a deck crew can align by hand? The physics says the lens. The doctrine says the lens. The exercise results say the lens. But the acquisition budget has been flowing toward the automation. That tension is not resolved. It is ongoing, and it will shape every carrier aviation program decision for the next decade. Drop your answer in the comments, Team Ball or Team Meiji carpet, and tell us why. The discussion there tends to run deeper than the video, and we read it. If you want to follow where the carrier aviation debate goes next, the electromagnetic spectrum fight, the question of what happens when an F-35C's datalinks are denied over the South China Sea, the math on sortie generation under contested conditions, that thread continues. The geometry and the economics keep pointing in directions that cut against the obvious answer. Stay with us for the next one.